Welcome, everyone. My name is Amanda Williams, and I am here with Jim Zobel. And I forgot to mention this last time we did this, but Jim has recently celebrated his 30th anniversary at the MacArthur Memorial. And we know that so many of you really enjoy Jim's takes on all of this history that we talk about. And I just thought I would congratulate you on 30 years.
Thanks for embarrassing me. I appreciate it very much.
And you can congratulate me on 15 years.
Congratulations on your 15 years.
All right. All right. Thank you.
It's really not that long, though.
It is 15 years. It is.
It is.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about MacArthur and the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC as it was known at the time. The CCC was one of the most popular relief programs during the Great Depression, and between 1933 and 1942 it put 3 million men to work in the United States. They worked on conservation and transportation projects across the country, on federal, state, and local lands. And the interesting thing is that this idea was the brainchild of President Franklin Roosevelt and his liberal New Deal advisors, but it was ultimately very successful because of the U.S. Army, at the time a bastion of conservatism, and more specifically it was successful because of the efforts of Army Chief of Staff General Douglas MacArthur, who himself was, I think, categorically opposed to the New Deal. So it was an interesting match made out of necessity between the Army and between the government. And today we're going to be talking about MacArthur and, again, the CCC. So, Jim, let's start with Roosevelt and MacArthur. D. Clayton James, one of the best biographers of MacArthur, says that ideologically they were poles apart and that MacArthur's antipathy towards the New Deal was pronounced. MacArthur is Chief of Staff of the Army when Roosevelt is elected. He's obviously not thrilled about Roosevelt's election, I would imagine, but do we know what he expected from the Roosevelt administration, and what did he think was going to be the biggest battle for the U.S. Army?
I think he expected to get canned. To be let go by Roosevelt, because right before Roosevelt comes in, of course, is the bonus march,
right?
Which every New Dealer thinks MacArthur is just this fascist militarist dictator type person, and even what was it, Eleanor Roosevelt, years and years after it, was still spreading the lie that Army troops had fired on the people.
She did that?
Oh, yeah. And so, I mean, it was something that had been built up, and so you would think that, when Roosevelt and all these, Democratic, liberal New Dealers come in, that he would be on the chopping block. And even before, right before Roosevelt comes in, they're having all those problems in Congress, because Congress is cutting the pay of the officers by like 10%. They want to cut out like the retired pay of all these, former generals, and that's where MacArthur finally gets Pershing back on his side because he saves his pension. And so there's a lot of trying to cut the Army just because of the dire straits the country is in, and MacArthur's trying to keep that officer corps whole. And so all that's going on right before Roosevelt comes in, and then Roosevelt comes in, and I think he thinks, I'm probably going to get canned, but a lot of, these people that have written about MacArthur, and it seems very true that it's only because of the CCC program that he probably doesn't.
You think so?
And that the Army, actually gets a boost because of what they do.
Okay.
For the CCC. Now, does MacArthur envision that? Maybe, because he's so presently ahead of the curve as far as them enacting all this stuff, as we'll talk about. So, he has a very adept ability at seeing how movements will go, and so I think that once this really starts, he sees that this is a way to get the Army on a good page with all these New Dealers that have come in.
That makes sense. And we will talk in a minute about how he jumps into action to make sure it goes so smoothly, and that the Army's ready like day one. So, okay. But before we get to that, though, so the CCC is established via legislation and executive order in spring, I think March, April let me look at my notes.
1933.
1933. So it's favorably received by most people, but the vagueness of the legislation establishing it does concern some people. What are some of those fears? I know labor unions have some fears. I know some people are afraid of. Well, you tell us.
Yeah, that guy, the guy who runs the American Federation of Labor, I think it's Maurice Green or something like that. He says it's Hitlerism, because Hitler's just come to power in Germany. You've got the Soviets, basically controlling everybody's lives. And also building. You've got the Japanese who have now militarized. They've gone into Shanghai, and they have already had the Mukden incident. And so I think a lot of these people in the United States are looking around the world and seeing how all these ultra-nationalistic, militarist groups are working to mobilize all the people in those nations, to be militaristic. And so they're worried about that if the Army's going to run this, especially because, like we just said, what they think about MacArthur running it, as far as, the bonus march had just happened, where the Army had gotten the stain of going in and control, wiping out the Veterans March. And so I think a lot of people are very worried about that as regimenting young society. Militarist education of our youngsters. Because I think of the CCC, of the 300,000 that they bring in that early point, I think it's like 80% are under 21, and most of them are high school dropouts. That couldn't get jobs, but they were willing to go to work. In this program, which was like an outdoors, Department of Interior, kind of situation.
So military-age men, a lot of them, probably very impressionable.
Yeah.
And you're pulling them all together, and who's going to be in charge of this? Is this a standing pseudo paramilitary force?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are worried about that.
Yeah, MacArthur initially comes out though and says, no, it's not going to be that, right?
Yeah.
But later on,
he'll have different ideas.
Okay. So we'll
I mean, you've got this opportunity right in front of you. He wants to take advantage of it, but not in the sense that these people are thinking, oh, this is like this fascist movement, that's going to happen.
Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about this before, but MacArthur sees this legislation coming, he starts getting the Army ready for it. So what does he start doing?
Well, what they want the Army to do, I mean, it'd be a Department of Labor, Department of Interior, agricultural type program, to put all these people to work, like you were saying, infrastructure and parks and things like that, But the Army is going to be responsible for bringing all these people in, having like a 3-week training course, inoculating them all, basically like getting them ready to, and then they have to ship them to these 1,400 camps that are going to be established in 49 different states. And so it's this massive I think they're bringing in like 8,500 people a day. And so that's going to be their job. And the legislation gets proposed, I think it's March 10th. It's going to be enacted on the 31st. But on the 24th, MacArthur's already got this Colonel Duncan Major, I believe is his name, who's working. And they have an entire budget already. They can go 7 days before Congress even approves this thing and say, we have the entire budget all ready to go. Because MacArthur had seen, they're going to make us do this. We got to have this right now. And it'll come down to later, they're going to have to take over a lot more than that. But that's what I mean about MacArthur being on top of things. And so as soon as even before it's enacted, the Army knows exactly what it's going to do and, has a plan all ready to go, to bring in these people and ship them out and train them, for 3 weeks. Make sure that they know sanitation and all these other, things.
It always strikes me, in this particular case, how good MacArthur was at understanding how the legislative process works and how these bills come up. And, where do you think he learned that? Do you think that's when he's in, Teddy Roosevelt's White House for a while, or when he's, working for Newton Baker, right around the time of World War I? Like, where do you think he gains that political acumen of knowing, this is what I have to keep an eye on?
I think it's just that entire concept of preparedness. I mean, be prepared. And that's all he ever talks about. Before World War I, with Leonard Wood and all those people that were all about preparedness. And as well, being in the Army, you see that the Army is really the only thing that is capable of carrying out these things, because it's all by orders and it's very job oriented. This is your job, you're going to do this. And the Army is especially capable because they get rid of all the, in a sense, they get rid of a lot of the bureaucratic oversight of things, because the Army commanders can cut through that. And that's the way MacArthur will set this up. As when the Army is asked to take over basically everything, to run the camps and all that stuff, MacArthur sets it up so it'll be under the Army Corps area assignments, and generals will have complete authority. Nobody will be able to say no, and that's to streamline everything. To make that happen. And so I think MacArthur sees that as the Army's capability. He doesn't like the fact that the Army has to do this and never will, but he knows that they are the only ones that can do it.
So the way it's initially set up, the Army's just supposed to enroll them, like you said, get everybody inoculated, get them supplies they need, and then transport them to these places where, what the Forest Service and other government bureaus are supposed to take over. But then the Army ends up in charge of all of it because no one else
can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. In May, the guy who runs it is that guy Fechner. And they have to set up all these camps, medical facilities, sanitation, infrastructure, tents, outfitting all these men. They have to give them clothes, towels, all that kind of stuff. And the Army's the only one that, all these labor guys, there's a lot of talk. It's kind of like today, there's a lot of talk, but nobody knows how to enact it. And that's what I mean about the military is very job oriented, and you have an order, you have to set this camp up, that's your job, get your engineers on it. And then eventually you have them, 2 officers are going to have to run the camp with another reserve officer, and then I think 4 non-coms and some enlisted people, and then with 200 men. And so they'll all be run by the Army, for that first year.
Earlier we talked about this being kind of a match made out of necessity, so I think you've hinted at it already, but how does this arrangement help MacArthur and the Army? And then how does it, in some ways, maybe hinder preparedness?
MacArthur said the best thing about it was none of these CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps people, are part of the military. They're not under orders to be there. They can leave whenever they want. And so it's really, they see it as this highlighted way to get young officers to be able to lead, to motivate people without being able to inflict punishment or anything like that. You have to be able to motivate these men, these boys really, to be able to do all this work, but you're not going to have that military justice or anything behind you. So it really does become a motivational leadership tool for the Army. And as well, they get to see that they can, I think, what was it, in the first 3 months of World War I, they were able to put 185,000 people together, but here they've done 300,000 in that 3-month period. And I think that was as many as they had brought together for the entire Spanish-American War, to bring them in. But they've done this in 3 months. They've used 2,000 trains to transport them all over the country, 3,600 trucks to be able to get them all to the camps. They have the camps ready to go. You're going to use the Army Inspector General to inspect all these things. So, it's a very efficient thing they set up. But, again, MacArthur's against it. He avidly works everything, but he says we're wasting time. These people aren't training. All these officers are now getting involved with this civilian thing that has nothing to do with them training to fight the wars to defend the country. And so that's the way he looks at it. It's a year lost, because I think it's 30% of the officer corps. They use 530 some Navy as well as Marine Corps officers to run these things, and he's like, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, not the primary mission.
Yes. Yeah, especially with the way the world is. That you've got Hitler going, you've got the Japanese going, you've got the Soviets going. It's a nut show right then.
So there were people in 1933 that were worried about this becoming a standing army. And then in 1935, MacArthur asks the House Appropriations Committee to actually give him the budget for military training for the CCC. And at this point, then, he's accused of trying to militarize the CCC. Tell us about the firestorm that ensues.
Yeah, he wants to, after they've done their time, he was going to offer 3 months extra training. And then these men would know what to expect if they went into the military, and they would have some basic understanding of what it would be like when you went into it. And he wanted it to be called this enlisted reserve. But yeah, everybody goes crazy. I mean, all these anti-fascist moves, militarism in education. John Dewey, the guy who creates the Dewey Decimal System, as well as that Reginald Niebuhr, the great historian. They're all against this. They think it's okay, he's trying to get them all militarist now, and then it comes back. That's the guy that ran the bonus army, out of town. And so they're always going back to that, and they're always worried about him, making this thing become like this ultra nationalistic militarist operation, and they pretty much squash it, and that's it. He doesn't fight it or anything like that. It's just like, but it's like he had said, no, it's nothing like that. But then he's like, oh boy,
2 years later,
this is too good to pass up. I gotta go for this.
He's feeling the pressure though of the Army's not really focused on its primary mission.
Yeah.
He, like you said, he's seeing these wars. He's very worried that the next war is right around the corner.
Yeah.
He's worried about preparedness. And so maybe he changes his mind because he says, we are going to need this.
Well, even after they do the CCC and they get it all set up and everything, the Congress still comes back. We're cutting all the pay of everybody in the military. You're going to lose all these troops and everything, and it's just a constant bashing of the military that's going on. You wonder why we were so unprepared at the beginning of World War II. It's a lot due to that. Mm-hmm.
We could do a whole talk on how he saves the officer corps and senior enlisted during the Great Depression.
Didn't we do that already?
Did we do that? I don't think we did, but we should. We could add that to the list for someday. Okay, so I've always thought it was very interesting that MacArthur hates the New Deal, right? There's no kind of argument there. But again, in his first couple years, he is really responsible for executing things like the CCC on kind of an incredible level. I mean, I think arguably without his attention to it, I think it would have failed.
Yeah. And Roosevelt agreed with that, and so did that guy Fechner, who runs the CCC. And when MacArthur came out with that thing about let's do this enlisted reserve, all those guys were seriously like, no. But then they were at the same time. It was only because of you and the Army that this thing worked. MacArthur is kind of like Hoover in the sense of rugged individualism. You have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They don't believe in social programs wasting the national treasure, and that's the way they look at it. All these taxes that have come in, you're just giving it away. All the foreign money that goes overseas. Why are we wasting the national treasure on these things? Because they believe that in that pioneer spirit. That every man should have to pull himself up by Captain John Smith. If you don't work, you don't eat. And I think that they're of that mind. And that's why they can't understand the liberal, as Social Security. That drives them absolutely, sorry about banging, but that drives them absolutely nuts.
Right.
But.
And yet, flash forward, occupation of Japan, MacArthur is very willing to put a lot of New Deal ideas in place. So there's some tension there. Is his idea essentially, it's maybe not 100% great for the United States, but some of this works in other places?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, as America's come to learn, we do have socialist things going on, that are programs that help a lot of people, that weren't in place back then. And so we're kind of a mix between this capitalist and socialist, society. And I think that they were, he always felt that even what Lenin said, socialism is a bedfellow of communism, and that's what he always believed. You know, is that if you let this thing run too far, then it's going to lead to because the communists are always looking for a chance to take over, and which we all have seen for the past 80 years. And so I think that he, looked at that in those social programs. Does he ever change his mind? No, I don't think so. Because well into the 50s and the 60s, he believed that America was, spending all of its, cash on social programs.
Interesting. Any final thoughts, MacArthur and the CCC?
No, I always think it's, interesting that, MacArthur's known for this, all the military things, but, the things that he did that were very successful, that are great, like this. The CCC was a great thing. I'm upset that they built the Skyline Drive on the best views in the national parks, but that's just what they were doing. So it was a good thing for everybody. It was a good thing for the country, and a lot of those guys that went in the CCC, they did understand the military when they went into it because they had been in the CCC, and it was in a sense a military run operation.
All right. Well, thank you.
Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think you summed it up. I've just always thought it was interesting how he opposes it, but does it very well. I think he's a very loyal Army officer.
And maybe he did see that if I help, they're going to help
They're
out the Army.
to me.
Right. It'll help out the
Yeah.
Army. So.
But then I also like his pragmatism later on in Japan, where I think his values don't change, but I think his job as an executive and his job to make things happen or fix things,
make things work.
He always is able to do that.
Yeah.
Without necessarily changing values. So, all right. Well, thank you again, Jim, for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for your 15 years of excellent service.
And for your 30 years, combined 45 years of service to the MacArthur Memorial.
And if you divide 15 into 30, you get 2.
All right. Well, we will be back again, I think, in about another month.
I don't know.
I think so.
That's your decision.
I think so. So, thanks again for joining us.